the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where if the first weekend of 2026 has taught us anything, it's that if you are a shitbag narco dictator, maybe don't try to taunt Donald Trump. Maybe don't go on television and start waving your big swinging dick around going, "Here I am, you bastard, come and get me," because, yeah, he might actually come and get you. And not in the abstract either, not diplomatically, not with a sharply worded letter from the State Department written by somebody who majored in intersectional conflict resolution. He may actually come and get you. You know how Theodore Roosevelt famously said, "Walk softly and carry a big stick"? Trump walks around loudly and carries a freaking sledgehammer. And if you dare him to swing it in your direction, there is a significantly non-zero chance that he's going to take you up on the offer. And now, having dispensed with that longest of all parentheticals in the history of the universe, good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the year's first edition of the Blast Radius. Glad to have you with us tonight. And as you may have noticed over this past weekend, perhaps while you were recovering from whatever bad life decisions you made on Friday night, the United States conducted a military operation in which Senor Maduro of Venezuela was plucked out of what he thought was a secure location in Caracas, bundled into an American airplane, and before he could say, "Go to hell, you imperialist Yankee bastards," he was on his way to New York City to face justice in a U.S. courtroom, which is a hell of a way to start out the new year, I think. Most of us begin January by vowing to drink less and maybe do a bit of jogging. Some other people begin it by being extraordinarily renditioned and having their picture taken in earmuffs and blackout goggles. But hey, you do you, bro. It's not this reporter's place to judge another man's resolutions. And most impressively, most importantly of all, this very sophisticated, very complex operation was successfully carried off without the loss of any American lives or vehicles or materiel, except for one wounded airplane that is expected to make a full recovery, which is no small thing and deserves to be said out loud, preferably before anyone on Twitter decides to pretend they were opposed to success on principle. Now, before anybody starts hyperventilating and pearl clutching, and as much as I hate to paraphrase Barack Obama, let me be very clear. The host is not here to adjudicate the morality or the legality or the long-term wisdom of the Venezuela operation, because that way lies madness and congressional hearings and cable news panels where everyone looks, with all due respect to Edward II, like they have just had a red-hot poker shoved up their bottom hole. That is not analysis. That is ritual humiliation performed for advertising revenue. The thing that does interest me, however, and it's a thing that should interest all connoisseurs of historical perspective, is the fact that whenever the United States conducts military interventions in Latin America, we tend to behave like this is a brand new idea we just came up with while we were in the shower, like we just leaned back against the tile, stared down at the grout, and said, "Wait a second, what if we just went in there and fixed the thing?" So with that in mind, tonight we submit for your consideration the following Field Guide to American Military Adventures in Latin America, so that when this happens again, and make no mistake, it will happen again, you will at least recognize that this verse of the song rhymes with the last verse. Think of it as a guided tour from the Monroe Doctrine to the Woodrow Doctrine to the Ronroe Doctrine to the newly proclaimed Donroe Doctrine, which is a lot like the previous doctrines, but with substantially more gold leaf trim. Rule number one, this time we have a plan. We open with Panama, 1989, Operation Just Cause, which right away, the name alone tells you that we were feeling pretty damn good about ourselves. Although some people preferred to call it Operation Pineapple Face, and that's a whole separate issue that involves helmets and camera angles and Clearasil. This was the prototypical late Cold War model of foreign intervention. We have clear objectives. We are bringing overwhelming force to bear. The target nation contains one extremely removable dictator who stands accused by the United States courts of all manner of very dastardly crimes. This is the intervention PowerPoint. This is the one where every bullet point lines up cleanly and nobody has to ask what the hell phase 4 means. And to be fair, tactically speaking, it worked. Noriega was removed. The regime did collapse. The mission was declared a resounding success. And it even enabled Mark Milley to have a couple of actual combat service ribbons among that big, ridiculous collection of fruit salad participation awards that he wears on his jacket. But even here, you see the pattern. Massive force, urban chaos, civilian disruption, and the dawning realization that so-called clean interventions still leave you with a mess that you have to live with. And they oftentimes don't change the long-term status quo all that much in the country that you say you are trying to liberate. Panama is when America says, we are the adults in the room, and we know exactly what we are doing. And history replies, that is absolutely adorable, you sweet summer child. Rule number 2, we're just here for a minute. We move next to Grenada, 1983, Operation Urgent Fury. A much sexier name than Operation Just Cause, it has to be said. Very Top Gun, very cocaine adjacent. This is intervention as a speed run. No pun intended. An island nation smaller than most U.S. counties with fewer residents than an average Costco on a Sunday afternoon invaded to rescue a few dozen medical students and ostensibly to prevent the emergence of a Marxist government that might potentially someday exist if we leave it unattended. And besides, if you go into your doctor's office and see a diploma on the wall from the Medical University of Grenada, are you going to be filled with an abundance of confidence? Let me answer that for you. No. You are not. This is preemptive intervention based entirely on the fear of regretting not intervening later, which is the foreign policy equivalent of buying a gun because you had a weird dream, which the host has never done before, allegedly. It was also the animating cause of one of history's most awkward telephone calls of the second half of the 21st century between the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and the President of the United States. Hello, Ronnie. Maggie here. Well, hi, Maggie. How are you today? Very well, thanks for asking. But I say, Ronnie, I couldn't help noticing you seem to have invaded one of our former colonies. Now, look, Maggie, I think you're a real fine gal, and I was totally rooting for you guys last year when you played Argentina, but I couldn't say that out loud at the time, you understand. Well, yes, Ronnie, that's all well and good, you see, and I do appreciate the sentiment. I just would have liked the courtesy of a phone call before you lot went barging into our sphere of influence. You see, I know we don't have an actual empire anymore, but lots of people over here very much like to pretend that we still do, and I'm afraid this has caused some rather hurt feelings. Maggie, I get where you're coming from, I really do, but as the leader of the free world, I just can't tolerate communism here in the Americas, even if it is just hypothetical communism. What kind of a cold warrior would I be if I did that? All right, Ronnie, I'm willing to let this go, but you do understand I'll have to lodge a very strongly worded diplomatic protest just in order to save face, but it's nothing personal, you see. Maggie, that's real decent of you, and I sure do appreciate it. And I guarantee you this is all going to make a really awesome Clint Eastwood movie in a few years from now. Oh, that does sound nice. I trust you'll take me and Dennis to the premiere when it comes out. Well, not only will I do that, Maggie, but I will even do a Clint Eastwood impersonation for you right now here on the telephone. Oh, Ronnie, that would be such a delight. All right, Maggie, here goes. My name is Gunnery Sergeant Thomas Highway, and I've drunk more beer, pissed more blood, banged more quiff, and kicked more ass than all you numbnuts put together. Oh, thank you, Ronnie. That was such a treat. Okay, Maggie, you take care now. Bye. This was also the one where different branches of the U.S. military couldn't communicate with each other because their radios didn't work together, which feels less like trivia and, frankly, more like allegory. Grenada is what happens when Cold War anxiety meets logistical reality. We did win, but we also learned that even when you massively outgun your opponent, bureaucracy still gets a vote. And bureaucracy, as ever, tends to vote present. Rule number 3. Something bad could happen. But then there's the Dominican Republic in 1965. A civil war breaks out, as civil wars sometimes do, and somebody somewhere might be a communist. And goddamn it, we just can't have that. Suddenly, 22,000 American troops are deployed to make sure ideology never even gets comfortable. You might call this an intervention driven entirely by vibes, not by evidence, not by any favorable outcome that seems achievable or even foreseeable, just a deep institutional feeling of, well, by God, I don't like the look of that. I don't like it very much at all. And naturally, LBJ was holding a little shrieking beagle puppy up by the ears while he was saying that, just to complete the mental image for you. This is the foreign policy equivalent of calling the fire department because the toaster made a noise that you didn't like. Sure, something could have gone wrong, but now something most definitely has. Rule number 4, we will leave once things settle down. If you really want the origin story, you have to go back to the Banana Wars, Nicaragua, Haiti, Honduras, a series of conflicts that were bookended by the Spanish-American War and the institution of something that we very quaintly named the Good Neighbor Policy in 1934. This is where the United States perfected the concept of the temporary military presence that lasts so long it starts receiving mail. We arrive to stabilize the situation, we reorganize the power structure, and then we say we are leaving just as soon as things settle down, which history translates as just go ahead and cancel everything you had on your calendar. This is also where Latin America learned to recognize the sound of good intentions arriving by boat. Rule number 5, we will know success when we see it. And floating over all of this like a sepia-toned fever dream is the punitive expedition of 1916. General Pershing chasing Pancho Villa into Mexico with cavalry optimism and absolutely no exit strategy. Lieutenant George Patton, having just led history's inaugural motorized assault, returning to camp with the carcasses of 3 enemy combatants strapped to the hood of his Dodge touring car like so much venison. No declaration of war, no condition of victory, just horses, dust, and a strong, unshakable belief that momentum counts as policy. It doesn't work, of course. In fact, it doesn't resolve much of anything, really, but it does, however, establish a new tradition, which brings us back to Venezuela in the year 2026. Different country, different technology, different rhetoric. And today you can get a job done with 20 men on the ground that used to take 20,000. And to be sure, there is something to be said for that. But the underlying belief remains largely unchanged, that we can intervene surgically in a complex political ecosystem without knocking over any of the furniture. History doesn't say that's an impossibility per se, it just says that it's never boring, it is rarely clean, and it is invariably followed by the words, gosh, nobody could have predicted that, which, historically speaking, is America's favorite punchline. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, here ends your field guide to American military adventures in Latin America, and I now transmit you into the brawny but strangely comforting arms of my distinguished colleague, your illustrious co-host, the one and only, your friend and mine, Mr. Caucasian Sasquatch.